says, we condemn the Lausanne Treaty. It barters legitimate American rights and betrays Armenia for the Chester oil concession. We favor the protection of American rights in Turkey and the fulfillment of President Wilson's Arbitral Award respecting Armenia. And that was in the Democratic Party platform of 1924. And during the party convention of 1924, Senator Pat Harrison of Missouri stated in his speech, when the Christian women and children of Armenia were being wantonly given to the Turkish sword, when thousands of these Armenian followers of Christ, driven like cattle into exile, were dying of starvation and exposure in the highways, when Christian churches and Christian homes were being given to the flames, and ministers of the gospel importuned the administration for a note of protest, it was refused. But the moment the oil magnates of the land saw the concession in the oil fields of Mosul, the administration that refused to intervene to save Christian lives, Christian churches, and even Christian homes went to the front with vigor and decision. Then he ends his speech, show this administration oil well, and it will show you a foreign policy. That was in 1924. So there were basically two groups lined up against each other on this treaty fight. Kardashian gathered together, of course, Democratic partisans, as I read just now, disillusioned relief workers. I mean, many American relief workers were very upset that nothing was done for Armenia politically in the aftermath of the whole League of Nations debacle. And he also included even xenophobes. People did not want to deal with foreigners. I mean, it was a sort of an odd mix, but he cleverly sort of put a coalition together. Then on the other side of the debate was people who were pro-treaty. This included, of course, the new Secretary of State, Charles Evans Hughes, the person who actually gave the keynote address at the beginning of the formation of the ACIA. He argued that American commercial interests and missionary interests would be secured by approving this new treaty. Now, just as a little aside, Kardashian had a very short temper, and at one point he was so incensed that Charles Evans Hughes turned his back on Armenia that he even told his friends he was going to go down to Washington, D.C. to shoot Hughes. And his friends really had to restrain him and keep him under kind of house arrest, basically to calm him down. But as we'll discuss in the portion of the talk of similarities and differences, it's not unusual for politicians outside of office to say one thing, and then of course once in office to say something else. Now, the Coolidge administration, well, first of all, let me just talk about the oil scandal. There certainly was something to it, though, of course, the whole oil scandal may have been exaggerated. In fact, the Chester oil concession actually fell apart several months later. The American group couldn't get their finances in order, and then the Turkish National Assembly had a change of heart. But nonetheless, the 1920s were famous for oil scandals. I mean, that was the administration of first was Warren G. Harding and then Calvin Coolidge. There was a lot of scandals in both those administrations, particularly the Teapot Dome scandal. Obviously it was used for political purposes, but nonetheless, the fact that you had leading politicians mentioning that you're bartering away Armenian rights for oil had a certain resonance within the American public at the time, because of all the other oil scandals that were going around at the time. Now, the forces that were supporting the treaty were the missionary establishment, American industrialists who wanted to do business in Turkey, and also sort of just in terms of the State Department wanting to have a new relationship with the new Kemalist Turkey, because they felt that other Europeans were having relations and they would fall behind. Now, the Coolidge administration saw the political tea leaves and figured out that they shouldn't send the treaty to the United States Senate right away because it would be immediately defeated. So what their strategy was that to delay the process. And they delayed the process hoping to build up more pro-treaty sentiment. But Kardashian sort of met them at every turn. And he would write memos and go on speaking tours and write to members of Congress, so to drum up publicity against the treaty. So the treaty was actually finally sent to the Senate in January of 1927, and it was actually defeated by 50 votes for and 34 against, not enough for the necessary 2/3 majority. And Senator King of Utah summed up the reason for the defeat. And let me just read you his passage. Excuse me. Obviously, it would be unfair and unreasonable for the United States to recognize and respect the claim and profession of Mustafa Kemal Pasha so long as he persists in holding control and sovereignty over Wilson, Armenia, now a no man's land, while nearly 1 million Armenian refugees and exiles are a people without a country. So certainly Kardashian tried to keep the Armenian question alive through his opposition to this Lausanne Treaty. And in that he was successful. But going back to the U.S. Constitution, a president has sole authority to recognize another government. So what happened was that the Coolidge administration, even though they were defeated in this treaty, were then able to recognize, this was kind of plan B, recognize the Kemalist Turkish regime through the use of executive powers. Kardashian was incensed by this and threatened a lawsuit against President Calvin Coolidge, but he was not successful. And in fact, that was kind of the death knell of the Armenian lobby at that time. Kardashian, just as a footnote, actually continued to fight on until his death in 1933. And he was actually alone at this period because he sort of lacked our Armenian community support at this time. And the community, was such that, with all the defeat of the mandate, the defeat of U.S. aid, the fact that the United States now recognized a new Kemalist regime in Turkey, all of that made a lot of the Armenian-American community sort of turn away from sort of American politics and concentrate on sort of building new lives in America, as genocide survivors and their offspring. So this was kind of a sad ending to, I think, a heroic but a futile attempt on behalf of this lobby. So I wanted to spend some time sort of talking about this lobby just to give you some indication of what it was all about before we sort of talk about the differences between that lobby and the current lobby, because we can draw some interesting conclusions and learn some lessons here. The first difference is the socio-economic conditions, which was pretty obvious between the Armenian-American community then and the Armenian-American community today. In fact, one of the reasons why we can see that it was actually a non-Armenian-American lobby in favor of Armenia was because the Armenian-American community was so weak and really politically unsophisticated in terms of American politics. So there was a huge difference now, and of course in socioeconomic status, whereas the community before was largely of factory laborers, farmers, small shopkeepers. Now, of course, we have professionals, entrepreneurs, industrialists, academics. Most young people in America today are college educated. And of course, the monetary issue. There's a lot more, of course, money in the community today. And I'm not an expert on sort of campaign finance in 1918, but in terms of how Congress is run today, of course, Congress would need a lot of money to win office. And that's just a basic fact of life these days. And of course, the community has been able to get some influence by having fundraisers for various members of Congress. So that's sort of one big difference. The other big difference is organization. The two lobby groups today, of course, the Armenian Assembly of America and the Armenian National Committee of America, they both are organizing, they both have offices in Washington, but also are organizing branches around the country. And having worked in Washington, this is sort of a fact that may not be very well known, but sometimes all you need is really a group of like 20 or 30 committed individuals to get the ear of a congressman. And if there's no countervailing pressure, that congressman will vote for you.